You know, we usually picture the Allied forces in World War II as this fully formed, unstoppable juggernaut, just seamlessly executing massive operations like D-Day. But the reality? The United States Army actually had to learn modern warfare the hard way. So let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking Operation Torch, specifically the brutal early blunders in North Africa, and how those harsh lessons literally transformed America's military into the powerhouse we remember today. To really grasp where the U.S. started, we have to look at the number 17. Shockingly, right before Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Army ranked only 17th globally in size. They were sitting far behind much smaller countries like Portugal and Romania. And sure, the nation rapidly expanded its armed forces after December 1941 and built up this incredible industrial might, but the soldiers themselves lacked one absolutely crucial thing: they had zero battlefield experience. Which brings us to part one, America's baptism by fire. So, picture the global stage in 1942. Joseph Stalin was desperately demanding a second front to relieve his Soviet troops over on the Eastern Front. But a direct invasion of France was deemed way too risky by Allied leaders at the time. So, Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt agreed on a massive strategic gamble in North Africa. Their goals were multi-layered. They definitely wanted to trap Axis forces and secure the Western Mediterranean, but fundamentally, they desperately needed a proving ground to prepare this totally green American army for the eventual much larger invasions of Europe. Moving on to part two, the amphibious landings. Now, when the operation launched on November 8, 1942, the initial assaults were actually a remarkably successful logistical undertaking. This was effectively the first major American offensive against Nazi Germany, and over 107,000 Allied troops just poured onto the beaches across Morocco and Algeria. They targeted three main sites: Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers. Because the initial resistance came mostly from Vichy French forces rather than hardened German troops, the Allies were able to swiftly secure crucial ports and airfields, getting a really strong foothold right out of the gate. And the naval support for this operation? Truly unprecedented for the time. The sheer scale of the firepower was just staggering. We're talking about the USS Massachusetts hammering the French battleship Jean Bart right there in Casablanca Harbor. Then you had the USS Ranger providing absolutely vital air support, while ships like the USS Bernardo executed these fast, daring assaults directly into port facilities. The coordination from the sea was super impressive. But the real test was waiting for them on land. And that leads us to part three, blunders and harsh realities. As the Allies raced inland to capture Tunisia before it could be reinforced, their early optimism completely vanished when they collided with the veteran German Wehrmacht. The Germans didn't just sit back. They rapidly deployed elite panzer divisions and Luftwaffe aircraft straight into Tunisia. And here's where we see the core issue for the Americans: their doctrine. American tanks and infantry operated totally independently from each other. They'd advance tanks without infantry support and infantry without enough artillery. Meanwhile, the Germans functioned like a well-oiled machine, using highly integrated, combined arms tactics to slice right through the American defensive lines. When you break down the major American deficiencies, it boils down to two massive problems, each making up over a third of the issue: inexperienced leadership and poor combined arms integration. American troops were just completely unfamiliar with the rapid armored thrusts of those elite panzer divisions. Plus, senior officers often stayed way too far behind the front lines to actually maintain control or communicate effectively. Throw in weak intelligence that constantly underestimated German strength, along with tactical inexperience on the ground, and honestly, it was a recipe for disaster. Let's get into part four, defeat at Kasserine Pass. All of these fatal flaws tragically converged in February 1943, creating a catastrophic battlefield situation in the mountains of western Tunisia. Looking back, you might ask, did the U.S. Army just get completely routed? Well, when Field Marshal Erwin Rommel launched a highly concentrated offensive right through Kasserine Pass, those inexperienced American defensive positions quickly collapsed. Entire units retreated in massive confusion. Equipment was just abandoned left and right, and supply lines were completely severed. By all accounts, it was a chaotic and terrifying breakdown of command and control. But rather than just writing it off as a simple rout, military historians actually define this as a severe tactical defeat, one that mercilessly exposed America's lack of preparedness against a seasoned enemy. The German forces achieved local tactical superiority simply because they were way more experienced, better coordinated, and highly flexible. Kasserine Pass proved the hard way that industrial power and shiny new equipment alone, they could never guarantee a victory. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5. Forging a Modern Army. This humiliating shock at Kasserine forced an immediate, massive reckoning within the American military command. They didn't just lick their wounds. They took a really hard look at exactly why they failed, and they rapidly implemented vital tactical steps. Right out of the gate, they put strict disciplinarians, like General George S. Patton, in command of the I Corps. They realized leadership had to be forward-facing and decisive. They also totally overhauled their doctrine to strengthen combined arms operations, ensuring that tanks, infantry, and aircraft finally fought as one unified force. And they instituted highly realistic combat training based directly on the bitter lessons they had just learned. So North Africa wasn't just a campaign. It was the intense crucible that forged the unstoppable combined arms force capable of ultimately conquering Normandy. Just look at the timeline progression here. We go from the raw, uncoordinated landings of Operation Torch in late 1942 to that devastating wake-up call at Kasserine in early 1943. The tactical shifts they made right there directly resulted in the highly successful invasion of Sicily just months later, which set the ultimate stage for D-Day in June 1944. Military historian Rick Atkinson actually perfectly summarizes this transformation. He notes that North Africa was not merely a campaign, but the crucible in which the modern U.S. Army was forged. It reminds us that the incredibly painful setbacks of 1942 actually saved countless lives during the eventual liberation of Western Europe. Every single major American operation that followed utilized the hardened discipline, improved logistics, and combined arms tactics that were developed right there in the sands of Tunisia. I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. If America hadn't stumbled so badly in the deserts of North Africa in 1942, would the D-Day landings of 1944 have been a complete disaster? It really makes you wonder. Sometimes, enduring the most brutal blunders is the exact test required to adapt, evolve, and ultimately achieve victory.